Switch it over to live chat. I can't tell if anybody's out there. I can't tell if anything... Oh, nope. I've got a live sign coming on. And I'm apparently showing black screen. Interesting. Nope, it's scrolling up. Okay, so, yeah, if anybody's here, say something, because this is ridiculous. And if not, that's fine too. I'll just cut it short today. But I've got my control panel and apparently one viewer, and we're going to try to stream. I have some things I wanted to try to do. I've got like my cup of coffee, and I've been putting out plate reverbs at a rapid pace. I don't know why this stuff moved and isn't where I left it, so let's make this be fixed. And what we're going to do today is, assuming I can keep this up, because I might have to stop, honestly, folks. But assuming I can do this at all, we're going to try to downsample MV and Starchild, producing MV2 and Starchild 2. And I may or may not ever, if you're saying anything, I may or may not ever see it, because everything is like broken beyond all recognition. But sometimes that's just how it seems to be in the world of streaming stuff. So you're going to have the worst stream ever. But if you can read C code, maybe it's the best stream ever. We've got code in here. We've got the guts of what downsampling would mean. That's been placed in here. Have we actually got this? Does it build? It builds. Well then, this might be a quicker stream than I expected. I didn't realize I'd already done some of the work ahead of time. Let's find out, shall we? Back over to sounds. And we're going to, even my mouse is broken and doesn't work. Yikes. Okay, well, we'll fight that too. Pink Crocodile, hi, somebody is there, yay. Everyone, I don't know if it counts as everyone. This is a real fizzle of a live stream. Like I was saying earlier, everything is broken beyond all recognition. Sometime I'm going to try to continue doing live stream, but honestly, this is making it very hard for me to say any such thing. I don't know why I can't do this side of it. I used to do it back in the day. I've been trying to add it because it seemed I was doing better when I was engaging with people and trying to be a little more available, and go figure. Again, it might be worth just... I've got this old Blackmagic video switcher, and that's actually a real handy thing. Like I can use stuff like that. I used to use it back in the day, and I used it too much. I made it do too many interesting things, and it melted down and died. So I got another one, and I sat it on a big old heatsink, and I used that for a while, and then I kind of stopped live streaming. Well, they make those these days where you can just attach it to like Ethernet or something and give it your information, and it will stream for you. Meaning I wouldn't have OBS anymore. And at this point, I'm really starting to like the idea, at all costs. And The challenge with that is I would still make good on my promise to get the precocity if I get up to that level. So it could leave me really boned as far as like resources are concerned. But I might need to get the streaming system because like my camera's fine. But how about I show you? Look, watch this. This is what I had to do to make this nonsense work. Oh, hang on. So, see how I'm there? So, check it out. This is what my feed into OBS looks like. But the camera is fine. The camera is running through to a monitor and it looks just fine. And as near as I can tell, it should be perfectly fine. Like, what with all the trying to get video stuff working, I have two of these. I swapped it out and it did the same thing. So this would be in OBS somehow, and I don't know how to make it be better. If anybody knows how to fix OBS when it starts doing this, that would be nice. For the time being, what I can do to make it fixed, since hang on. Since it's all magenta, what I can do is tint everything green, and it starts to look a little bit more like what it's supposed to look like, except for that's not actually true. This is now a green and white visual. So if I have any visuals elsewhere, like colored lights that are different, red light just becomes darkness, right? So yeah, everything is screwed. Yeah, this looks completely like the magenta looked like a filter, but that's just what I'm getting into OBS for no good reason. The thing that's capturing the camera is sending it through to a yeah, and I don't have any other filters on this, and there's nothing else that would be making this happen. So I'm just completely at a loss. Let's go back to the coding screen. That at least shows up. So yeah, when I was using a Blackmagic, they're ATEM mini things, which are pretty cool in their own right. They're neat, although they won't give you as good of a input as this Razer stuff. This Razer stuff is designed for gamers, and so it's giving you 1920p at 60 frames per second. That's better than the ATEM will give you, but the ATEM will let you run software and control all manner of things on the cameras if you have Blackmagic cameras. So I used that for a bit, and then the one that I had overheated and melted. Like, it progressively died. Anybody who watched my old streams might remember the days where it's like, okay, it's flickering, it's flashing, it's going all psychedelic, and then it just stopped working. And that's because the ATEM stuff, here. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. This is not going to be the longest stream because clearly I am fried beyond all recognition, but the ATEM stuff is designed to a price point, and what that does is you can do basic video switching and it's more or less okay, but when you're doing stuff like the input that I've got from the laptop, the one that when I switched to the coding you could see it, I could run that into the ATEM too. I had things like I could take a cable In fact, it is the same cable that I've got plugged in right now. That has an HDMI output, but to get it into OBS, I have to run another little converter thingy. And hey, Skychip. And back in the day, I could plug that directly into the ATEM. But when I did, it would come in as the native resolution of this laptop. And this is the one that I do the retro programming on. So this is an old laptop, and it won't do 1080. It won't do 1080p. It won't do 1920 by 1080. It's something smaller than that. It is, let's see, 1600 by 900. And it's claiming that it will do 1080p, but the deal is the LCD won't. So it wants to do like the HDMI and the color LCD, which is the screen for the laptop. Actually, you couldn't see that anyway because they didn't have that turned on. Whatever. This is a hangout and talk to chat day, I guess. Maybe that's all it needs to be, because it seems like I already have MV at least done. We'll see soon. But the ATEM Mini that a lot of people use to run cameras in, and it's the thing where you can set it up to automatically switch between the cameras. I was doing that with live streams for a while there. Maybe that's what people were liking. Maybe I need to get back to that. But I had cameras where you could switch around and, different angles on things. I really ran with that for a while. It was quite something. Bringing in the laptop caused the ATEM to take in different cameras and then have to rescale the laptop to 1080p internally. And it did a very good job of that, as in it looked good. And then I would also run the Sleepy Circuits Hypno. If people remember the streams I used to do, Sleepy Circuits Hypno is a little graphics generator. And so I would have these streams where I was trying to jam on modular synthesizer music. And it brought me down because I could not do anything that anybody really wanted to stick around for. People would just leave. There would be 2 people or 0 people. And part of that is because when I get working, I'll tend to work for 5 or 6 hours, and people just couldn't come up with the stamina. But it would also mean I would have the laptop going into the ATEM and the Sleepy Circuits Hypno going into the ATEM, and it would all be coming in an HDMI. And so the ATEM would be running on top of a DA converter, upscaling and downscaling several different inputs all at the same time in order to put out a 720p output for 5 hours at a stretch. So my little cheap video switcher, I just melted it. I just burnt it up. But one of those, if you get the fancier version of those, and by now it's been out for such a long time that I could probably get a used one, although I'd be worried that if I got a used one, maybe it had already been overheated and burnt up. But if I got one of those, I wouldn't necessarily have to use OBS, because OBS is screwing me over again and again, and it's always broken and it's always wrong, and I really don't need the stress. I wish there was something else I could do. I wish there was something else that I could use. Way back in the day, even before the ATEM, I was using, what was the Telestream software? And I would do Minecraft streams or whatever on that, which is not what I started out doing, but it's something that I've always tried to add. This January I turned to doing a bunch of Minecrafting just to sort of try to unwind, because some of the stuff over the last years or so have been really rough. And back in the day, a friend group that I had that that turned to radical politics that I didn't share. I would be streaming that using like Telestream software on like 5 computers ago. This was a long time ago. A long time ago. So maybe what I need to do is just figure out how to do this streaming stuff on something that isn't a computer. That might be the thing. Fortunately, I can still make videos. And fortunately, I could just switch back over to the coding thing, because let's have a look at this. This is actually me maybe being able to get some other updates out. MV, Starchild. Those have been out there for a while. In fact, I've even referred to it. People are talking about, there is a, oh God, all of my stuff is boned. This is not a happy day for me, but whatever. You do what you do. This is my job. There is in the VCV Rack forums a challenge going out there, which is use the Airwindows module for a VCV Rack jam. And they added Surge XT because Airwindows modules don't have oscillators or sequencers per se. But I mentioned that one of the things that I had done when demonstrating that I had started doing, I updated some things so that they could be available for the port that Paul from the Surge Synthesizer project has done. When demonstrating it, I threw MV onto a CV input. I used a pitch CV and I put an audio effect into it. So here we have Alien Kittens, of course. And let's play with MV. It's going to be in the AU. And here's MV. If we put it full on, we have a freaky sound. And we should be able to do the same thing with MV2, because this is the 44.1K version. I can find it. There it is. We'll set it to no regen. And it sounds the same. But here's the thing with MV, and this might hurt my little laptop a bit, but we'll live with it. MV was not set up to work with high sample rate. Hear how that's not, now it's much faster? If you take the same sound and change the sample rates, MV changes pitch. That's like 4 times faster. So the whole idea is I need to come out with a version of MV that is immune to changes of sample rate. Let's see whether it worked. I'm going to call that proof of concept. That worked. This is the 192K version of Alien Kittens. And that is NV, sure enough. And that is giving me the same time constants that I had on the original. So we're going to call that proof of concept. MV2, and I'm going to look over it a little bit. What you see here is how I did that. When I say undersampling, what I mean is when I'm doing complicated things like reverbs or things that are supposed to be like deep and spacious, if you have a deep reverb that's meant to be not simply a digital effect, but to sound like the real world, or even something that's modeling like the old MIDI verb or whatever, that was a digital effect, sure enough, but it ran through analog input and output stages. And what those stages did was band limit everything. The original MIDI verb, or MIDI verb 2, didn't give you like 20K, and particularly the original MIDI verb cut off at around like 16K or something. The sample rate really wasn't that high. So if you took it and, oh, hey, Gil, oh, thank you in return. If you took it and switched it to 192K and it was a naive algorithm, all of a sudden you're doing reverb that's like supersonic reverb, and that's not accurate to what the sound was supposed to be. So undersampling is checking to see if, like I said, you're running at 44.1K, 48K, like that, or you're running at a higher sample rate. And with undersampled stuff, which is something that I took to doing, if you are running at a high sample rate, like 192K, it will run the processing on the reverb one sample in 4. Like this. It's looking for something called cycle, and it's figuring out how many multiplications of the native sample rate it's going to be. And this is our native MV code. This is how MV is made. It's a stack of all passes. That's what the Bloom algorithm on the MIDI verb does. And then at the end, oh, and it looks like we have MV in it. Initially had Purist console code inside itself. So that's cool. We got that going on. And the undersampling is checking to see whether the cycles are hitting the one where we have to generate a new sample. If not, it's going to linearly interpolate between those sample points. And one thing that does is it makes it so if you have a big, complicated algorithm with all this stuff going on, all of these all pass, 26 all passes stacked to make up MV. And you're running it at 44.1K. And that's eating, X amount of CPU. If you bump it to 192K, but you undersample it, it's still using about the same amount of CPU and memory and everything. Very small difference there. So what that does is it makes it possible to run some of this stuff that sounds and works the same, but also isn't munching your CPU much worse at elevated sample rates, because I am, as always, strongly in favor of running things at 96K. It just gives you more room to be able to have alternate methods of aliasing reduction. And that's what I've been doing with console algorithms and a bunch of other things beside. I'm sold on that. So the undersampling enables you to do that. And it enables you to run these reverbs and things in such a way that they're not 2 times or 4 times as expensive. Because with any reverb, with any actual reverb, you will never, ever have higher than supersonic frequencies past like 20 foot of space. Sound wave goes out, sound wave comes back, it already doesn't have 20K. That stuff you only get from close miking things, like ASMR videos, where they're doing stuff and making noises of various kinds, like scraping a comb or brushing a coat. You put the microphone right up on the sound if you want to authentically have sound that's around 20K or so and have people's hair stand up in the back of their neck or whatever. You need a microphone that will do that, but you also have to be that close to it. I could probably even demonstrate that. What do I have that would work? Here, this is instructions for Erica Synth's drum sequencer. So if I slide my fingers on that, you probably can't hear it real good, but the microphone that I have is so good that people were complaining because they were hearing the sound of my water heater in the basement running. And it sounded like electrical noise because it makes a sort of droning hum. It's a heat pump water heater. And there's stuff that I have to do with that in order to quiet it the heck down, because you could hear it through the floor, and my microphone is that good that, and I will show that, because it's also good enough to come through the stream. Here's the sound from the place where I'm speaking, but I'm going to hold this up to the microphone and do the same thing, and you will clearly hear that it has more supersonic frequencies than it does here. Like, here's the sound. Then QED. So that's what happens with high frequencies. That's what happens with high frequencies as a function of how far away things are. It's one of the key cues to getting a sense of depth. That's also one of the reasons why analog records tend to have an easier time sounding good and having the sound of depth, is because they have intrinsic multiple low-pass and bandpass filters in everything about them. But that's also why I do undersampling on reverbs and spatial effects like MV, which we're looking at. It is so that I can have more efficient operation on this stuff. And let's go and look at Star Child and see if that one's done too. I might not have gotten to it. We'll see. We do have Star Child. You see the delay thing. It says D45102. That's an array. It is an array of 32-bit floats, and it's upwards of 45,000 samples kept in a place in memory. And that's what I do to make these sustaining things. Star Child does multiple taps into that. I'll show you what that is. Do I have? No, I don't. It has sustained duration, green coarse fine. This is before I started making stuff consistent with the VSTs. My code for the VSTs, which includes the way Steinberg has it set up, stops me from having long sentences. So this is AU only, and the VST for Star Child will be sustain and grain or something. And the original Star Child will not have the undersampling, because this was before I did that. And we've got where L and where R, which is probably something that we might have comments on what that's doing in the code somewhere. That might even be something having to do with grooveware. I might have taken that and included it as part of Star Child as a specific way of getting a sound. Because that's what you do if you have the code library for this stuff. You don't have to simply take a biquad filter if you want to make something darker. You could be like, I'm emulating this old effect, the Ursa Major space station. And if I do the grooveware algorithm, it might sound more like what the real one sounded like. So I'll use that instead. But then we've got this stuff that is selected. And last ref L and last ref R are what I use for the undersampling in cycle. So let's go and have a little look at our other code here. And that is indeed the undersampling code. I should switch over to where I can see the YouTube. Yeah, through folks hanging out. I am not at all sure if I'm going to. This might be a good. People were commenting on how burnt out I was in the video that I posted. There's some of that. You don't always know the reasons for it. I've been scrambling around, like getting my taxes done and complying with some things that Vermont State Housing Authority needs from me. So, I don't show everything in my life on stream or talk about everything while I'm posting plugins, but because of the amount of money that I earn on Patreon, everything in my world I do myself. Anything that I can, pass off, if I can afford to have somebody mow my lawn, I'll do it. Otherwise, when I have to mow my own lawn, I might lose a day because I run out and I do that and then I'm tired and I'm not thinking as clearly. But everything that happens, I have to do myself. I think this is very normal for people, so that should at least be a relatable thing. Anyway, Star Child 2. This is old enough that I'm defining things like dry sample and input sample up here in the header area, which is unusual. And then down here, we've got, this is the actual audio code. And here's where some of the stuff is designed. And up, this is where I have apparently defined, these days if I need to do that, I do it in the header file as defining the, I don't do it this way because this is actually a silly way to do it, but this is the way that I've apparently done it this time. So we're leaving this for now. We're leaving this because this is just what you would do. Let me show you in a recent project. Galactic 2 should indeed have that. Yeah, so this is what I did back when I was doing Star Child. If you were to do this kind of thing, what you should do is do it like this. Maybe not literally like this, but we're defining stuff up here in the header area where we're defining constants. And we're defining that up here. And then down here, what we're doing is we're defining some of this stuff in terms of what those constants were defined as. And I do have other stuff. Let me go and find it. This is a wandering around and finding stuff day, because it looks as if I already had the AUs for these things done, and that's pretty cool. I like that. Let's see what else we've got. I'm going to want to look in the AU section. And what did I have that used this technique? Because, yeah, I know there were places where I had defined an array up in the header section. And it was defining it, and then inside the array definition was a long series of comma-separated stuff. That's a better way of doing this. Let me see if I can find it. Why not? Let's go on a little exploration. We'll see what we can make happen. I wonder whether it's in Bright Ambience. I bet Bright Ambience is where I had that, because Bright Ambience uses that kind of technique. So if I had been expanding that, it would be somewhere like this. Called it. So if you were doing this kind of thing, rather than doing this, rather than doing like define the array, say how many entries are in it, and then go through and individually spell out each one, because I'm putting primes in here. They can't entirely be primes because this is a even number. So even numbers can be divisible by 2. but it must be me cheating somehow. Like 165. Something's going on here, which is these look to be literally all primes. I think this one is just one off from 999, and that's how I had it. And 999, this is also divisible by 3. It's divisible by 9, so this is not a prime. But everything under 997, I believe, is a prime. And that's part of how StarChild works. But if I was to do this again from scratch, I might even like write a program. That's how I'm doing some of the stuff in the reverbs these days, is I have a program written in the Godot engine that spits out literal code into a text box that I can copy and paste from. And it calculates stuff out and then writes it out as text, and I get to make something that's kind of like this. So this is how you would do it going forwards. It's a static int prime L, and see how this doesn't have anything in it, where with this, if I went into the StarChild 2 code, and you see where it says 171, I'm basically talking to, because I continually get people who are like, I would like to learn to code, so I might as well tell you the stuff that I picked up over the years of doing these things. This is basic C, but you got to start with the basics. This is an array. It's a long list of numbers. It's a long list of U in 32, so it's integer numbers. 171 of them, starting with 0, and then 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. And in StarChild, what I did was go through and start spelling them out one by one, which is the silly way of doing it. And this, you see me doing it this way. This is what that is. You don't need to do it this way. People will make fun of you doing it this way, or at least they should very well make fun of me, because this is all I knew at the time. But you can also define stuff like this. It's also an int, but rather than being a funny specific kind of int, with this one I'm just kind of leaning on the platforms I'm coding for are going to define int in a certain way, and I'm just running with that. And this would have numbers in it, but it doesn't have to have numbers in it, because if I use this bracket and this series of numbers with commas separating them, it will make up the array and make it as many elements as it needs to be, and then stop. So I go all the way. I think I took this list of numbers from some kind of online list of primes, and I used a text editor, probably Text Wrangler. I've bought BBEdit, which is the same thing, and edited it until it was a stack of numbers with commas separating them, and just ran with that. Copied and pasted that into a piece of code, put the bracket on the end and the semicolon, and pasted that into the code, and there we have the end result. And with this, I don't have to go through and specify each one, because it starts out like element 0 will be 5. And in this case, element 1 will also be 5. And then element 2 will be 13, and so on. And as it happens, I am going back and forth between these. I don't remember exactly how I pulled this one off, but something about it. These in bright ambience, they are all primes, but left and right are every other prime. So it's a sort of stereo dispersion of sounds. And this is how I made that happen. But the one that we are looking at here is StarChild, because I may have this one ready to go as well. I might have stopped at the point when I was ready to do the Mac VSTs and go on from there to do all the different platforms that I support directly. Because I support Retro Mac AU, Retro Mac VST, Windows 32-bit VST, this VST 2.4. Windows 64-bit VST 2.4. Linux for Intel processors, Linux for the Raspberry Pi. I'm given to understand that what I'm putting out is like 32-bit Raspberry Pi. That's because somebody helped me out by helping me with a script that can compile my stuff. And I run that script on the Raspberry Pi, which otherwise I don't know much about. I don't know much about Linux. But if there's a recipe that I'm able to follow in order to deliver my stuff to a population that could use it, I will go through the process of doing that for people, whether or not I understand the platform that I'm supporting. So I'm putting out Raspberry Pi binaries, but if people need the 64-bit version of the Raspberry Pi binaries, then somebody needs to tell me what code I must run, what script I must run that will spit out those binaries, and then I will happily include them. I don't know yet. What I was given to run only gives you the 32-bit, but I do that as well. And what we've got here is Starchild. And we appear to have, again, the old code, which I could clean that up. Right now, I don't think I'm going to. It says, this is the scaled tap for direct out in number of samples delay. Scale direct is a floating point number. We have two different controls doing something here, and let's just run this and find out. And we have some kind of darkness control, which is apparently going to do a moving average, and you get to blend into that one. With some of the reverbs these days, I'm not so much worried about making a moving average that blends. I'm more interested in adding increasing numbers of simple averaging in the middle of the reverb algorithm, which is going to darken things. And I do that on top of running biquad filters for more strident coloring of things. And here is another interesting case of a thing that you can do with code. This thing, range direct, is a giant switch statement. And it's stacked up in such a way, if I told the program to go through and format this for normal C code, it would probably reshuffle this to take a lot more space. I have it in a vertical stack for a reason, because there's very little going on here. And I wanted it to be visibly obvious what was going on here. Each of these cases, you switch into it at a particular point, and then it runs through every succeeding case, because nowhere do you see a break statement. Switch case works in such a way where it will jump into the middle of whatever that is. It'll jump to wherever the switch statement says. It could be an integer. You can use the integers to have the switch statement jump to enums. Enums are basically integers that work as names. So you can say enum, Bob's your uncle equals 4. Or you go through and you go enum, Bob's your uncle, Jim's your uncle, Jack's your uncle, Fred's your uncle. And you go through an enum and spell those things out. And then anytime you refer to Fred's your uncle, it'll be like 3. Because what it did inside itself was assign a number to each of those things. And then that enum is always going to be constantly that thing that was defined. And so you can use them in switch statements. You can have a switch statement for, thing that you're doing, and then the switch statement is some kind of identifiable word saying jump to calculate delays, and calculate delays actually is a number, but you can use the word for it and it sort of documents your thing. This is a switch statement jumping to actual numbers. And I see I have spaces in here so that it lines up vertically all across this stuff. That's something that you can do because C doesn't really care about white space very much. And what's happening is if you use a larger number, it adds more of this stuff. It'll do this one, and then it'll do this one, and it'll do this one, because there's no break statement. Select case usually works with a break statement afterwards, and it says it does this one, and then it skips to the end. But anywhere you're using a switch case statement, you can also have it go through and do a series of things, at which point the code design thing becomes figuring out stuff that you can do where it is useful to begin. I've got that in monitoring as well. For instance, let's go and look at monitoring this B and go and look at stuff day. Monitoring 3 would definitely have this. So I was talking about how you could define things with an enum. And I am apparently, we're defining this stuff not in the usual way, but it's functioning as kind of the same way. Now I've got these const, and the constants are defined to say these various things. So anywhere I refer to this word, it actually means 7. And that's because the Apple Audio Unit stuff uses this functionality to be able to draw its information. We've got a selection here where the integer number that the controller gives, because this is a param1, it's indexed, so it's an integer number, but it's got strings attached to it. So on the audio unit, this thing that is in the VST, a slider, this turns into a pop-up menu on Mac systems. I was doing this long before I was doing VST, so this kind of continues onwards. At least sometimes. I think sometimes I'm going with just the plain int. But for the Mac AUs, I've always did pop-up menus for this stuff. And you see we've got K menu item peak, slew, subs, mono, and so forth and so on. And then here, as we have process buffer list, this is where we work with the actual audio. And you do processing equals int get parameter k param1. And that gives us the variable coming in from the, because we get the result of this pop-up menu as a number, which also has posed some problems. Like one of the VSTs are very primitive in some ways, but they're kind of nice in others, because one of the things that happened early on, and might be still happening to this day for all I know, I would do the audio units, and just only Reaper would have the numbers for the audio units off by 1. So you would select subs in Reaper and from a pop-up menu and get like slew. And in every other DAW it would be correct, because what I had programmed in was correct, but there was a bug in the Reaper implementation. And people would ask me to change the number, and I couldn't, because inside the program, I can't tell what host is running it. So it's a bit of a down. But here we have a comparison to processing equals kvinyl. There's also a gotcha here that I fortunately missed this time around. If you think that you can do this, you're wrong. Because if processing equals kvinyl means you're assigning the value of kvinyl to processing, so it's always going to be. but equals equals in C means compare it. In this old version of Xcode, it doesn't actually warn you about this stuff, and so things like that have got by me. In the versions of compilers that people are using on the Surge Synthesizer forum, they will warn you about things like that, and so they recently uncovered some of this stuff, which I've gone and fixed. But see how we have switch processing? We're doing the same trick. Where here, it will do this and then all succeeding things. In the place where you jump into this stack, it'll just start doing more and more of these as you go. Here, if you have either of these things, we're not doing anything about it, and we break. Down here, we're doing particular stuff, like K-slew, this is the slew-only algorithm. This is peaks only. Subs only is actually kind of a huge algorithm. It's 26 IIR samples stacked together. It has its own sound to it when you do it that way. It's different from if you did it using biquads. And you notice how if you're in mono or inside, we run the same code here. Because either way, it'll pass through. And then if you're doing mid-side, mono means you only have mid. Side means you only have side. So we always convert to mid-side. But then, if the processing is not side, if it's less than, meaning if it's mono, because it's going to be one or the other if you're here, side equals 0, else processing is not less than k side. Mid equals 0 because we're doing side. And then we put it back. And same deal with these. K vinyl, K RAT, K monorat, K monolat, and K phone. These are all a biquad bandpass with different settings on each. And so the select case statement, it's going to fall through all of these guys. And then we start asking questions like, well, we know we're one of these things since we fell through all of these. So which one? Are we this? Are we that? And we start setting that kind of stuff up, doing things with it. And we're running the entire thing in console 5. We're actually running in a weird primitive version of console 5 where if you're doing ORAT or if you're doing any of these particular things, you can overdrive in the monitoring setup with vinyl, ORAT, monorat, monolat, or K-phone. If you go into it so hot that your output it would actually be, like 6 dB, 12 dB, 20 dB over clipping, what's going to happen is it's going to saturate and then wrap around again. And you will start getting, what's that thing that happens in West Coast synthesis? Wave folding. So you might never have known it would do that. But all of these particular monitoring modes are running into the most basic form of console 5, being just a syn, a sine, and then an arcsine. If you add these things together, just one after the other, you get the original sound back out again. But if you did anything with it that caused it to go beyond 1, arcsine will break, so I have to clip that at that point. But we're not clipping here. We're not clipping here, so this whole bank of stuff, if you go into it too hot, it will start frizzing out and going, it'll be wave folding, because that's what wave folding is. It's going through a transfer function that wraps back around again. And if you get louder and louder inputs into it, you'll start frequency doubling. Hey, oh, you're quite welcome. I'm going to cut this off probably before 1, but I'm chatting away as much as possible about some of these things, because why not? Like, the video is broken. I don't actually have to do the coding of Star Child and MV. I just have to adapt them to VST. I'll do that on my own time. So let's have a good talk about audio stuff. It's one of the useful things. And again, same trick here. With all of the cans algorithms, we drop through, and these are numbers, like this is going to be like 14 or something, but we can refer to it by the name. And then we just ask, okay, was that... And one thing you can do, if you get caught out by that assignment thing, that's why modern compilers check. If the modern compiler sees that you have said if processing equals kcans A, but it knows that's actually an assignment, it knows that that is making processing always equal kcans A, but it's in an if statement, then the modern compiler will be like, are you sure you meant to do that? Because you probably didn't mean to do that, because it's a meaningless statement. And you put it back to equals equals, and that's what it really is. And I think that one can get by people when they don't spend their entire time buried in C all the time. They might forget, as has happened to me occasionally. And with the cans, we have the same deal. Unless there is a question here, if I am clipping before getting to any of these things, which it does not look like there is. I could be wrong, but getting stuff in. We've got a biquad being defined for band passes. We're running this stuff inside, but we're only defining this once every buffer because we don't need to redefine the bandpass every sample. We only need to define it when we're going to change it. And it looks like we're not clipping. See, this is what you would do if you wanted to clip this and have it not wrap around on the kpeak is built out of arcsines, but you'd use this bit, but assigned to what the sign function would want. The sign function is going to ask if sample L is larger than what, 1.57 something. The point at which, as the numbers keeps getting larger, the sign function makes it start rounding off and then going back down again, and the half of pi is exactly where it goes to the top and has stopped. And that's how we do that. But yeah, cans is asking questions about whether it's the one or the other and getting an answer. There are other ways you can do this kind of thing, but I like having this very simple primitive way because it's much the same for the computer, and it just makes it very plain and explicit to see what's happening. Something I always prefer. And we have, on the cans filter, a base centering function, which is kind of similar to what you would get. I was asked recently, when I said I was going to do these things related to this collection of stuff, akin to my plate reverbs, and I was asked, well, are you going to do vinyl, and are you going to do tape, and are you going to do this and that? And I'm like, well, I've already done a vinyl. I've already done a tape. I'm looking to revisit the tape and do more of that. But a bunch of these things are already available. I don't really have to do an Abbey Road vinyl. I've already got 2 vinyl. It's optimized for that. But what I can do is a elaborate system designed to incorporate all of these functionalities to quickly and easily produce the results you would get out of bringing all of that stuff into your system. In other words, with this one, we've got all this stuff going on, and there's our monitoring 3. Here's Star Child. Don't have to change anything in monitoring 3. We're going to build it. Another thing that I've been doing is something that you have heard in the Kplate plugins, because console 0 that I did, the version of console that doesn't even have any aliasing suppression filters in it, and it is the simplest possible sort of pseudo-sine-esque. It's a little fatter than a sine function. The simplest possible pseudo-sine-esque saturation function that also includes multiplications by factors of 2 as part of its basic code. It's like what I can do to make a sine-like function that also has an arcsine equivalent, a function where you can saturate, but you can also anti-saturate to put the sound back. And I wanted to see whether I could do one of those. In fact, let's go and see. I'll show you. And it won't be in recent projects because it's been a while since I looked at this. But this lives inside the reverbs. The reverbs that are not the tube reverb include this because it's slightly more edgy. It's a little bit more like your transistor saturation, although not very much. Transistor saturation, that's often just a clip, but this is a little more linear near the 0 point than a proper sine function would be. And it starts to curl faster towards the point of clipping. And that is just this. It's these sort of magic numbers for where the maximum clipping would be. And it is input sample divided by 2 or divided by -2 times this minus input sample. So it's a increasing rate of curve function that is like the most. I ran across this article on the most primitive forms of sine approximation, and that's where I got this stuff. It's changed around a great deal, but that's where that started out. And I just massaged it until it became what I needed. And then as you can see, that is not only a very simple, like compared to a real sine function, this is so much faster. But not only is it so much faster in that it has to calculate so much less, meaning you'll be able to get a higher track count, you'll be able to do more. It is leaning on the already complicated plate reverb much less, although that's a bad example. But if you used this as a console, you'd be able to get way higher track counts because it is just taking up less CPU. That also means if I do things like the EQs that I use, where boosts start to go into a saturation function and cuts start to go into the inverse, well, this is the saturation function. And the opposite of the saturation function. And I asked Wolfram Mathematica, the website, to do this, and it did. You can get a function and go, give me the inverse of this thing, and Wolfram will figure it out and spit it out. And then you have it. So this is literally the opposite. It has different restrictions. If I go up to this number, which this started out as, if you go beyond this number, it blows up and dies. If you go up to this number, it's spitting out peaks that are like infinite volume, and so I dialed that back a lot for use in Kplate. And this I'm clipping at 2.8 or -2.8. That's still going to give you outputs that are way higher than 0. But it's the same deal. See, this input sample times 2, that is bit shift gain. That's literally what's inside the famous plugin that doesn't hurt the sound at all. I've built it into the guts of the algorithm. So all that happens as far as what you're doing to change the value of the function in order to do these things with it, to apply a version of console to it, is 1 divide by this magic number 2.827, etc., minus the input value coming in. And then you're dividing the shifted version of that by that, and that's the only math you're doing to it. So this all has the capacity of effectively being, if you can live with the changes in transfer function from what a proper sine calculation would be, this is probably the best sounding saturation function that you can get. That is my guess. Because, although remembering, of course, that if you would run the input sample at something like long double, then it kind of no longer matters. If you're doing a high enough resolution on it, and I stopped using long double because I was getting all of the results that I needed out of just double precision. And I do swear by double precision. So it doesn't really make a big difference, but it's those tiny little tweaks, it's those tiny little advantages that I go for. This would be your highest audio quality saturator. Simply because if you've got to pick a saturator, if you've got to pick a transfer function, and it's going to be something or something else, the only common factor is you'll have something where stuff gets louder and then it starts rounding off. It starts saturating and then it's no longer getting louder anymore with increasing input. That's a distortion. So this is ideally the ultimate quality distortion in the digital domain, as long as you like the transfer function, the curve that it uses. And so if things go well, I'm going to be building this into a lot of stuff. I might do something clever like find a way of going like stack this into one long string and then make it a macro. And up at the top of the file, you're defining the macro, or you're defining the macro in the H file. And then when you are doing the coding, anytime you need to do this, you just put the macro in. And your code then has that, and the C preprocessor goes and punches in all of this like text stuff. Might even be able to include comments, I'm not sure. And then compiles it. So the code that you work with could be simpler and easier to look at and still basically communicate the same thing. But you're doing a similar thing to what one does when you're doing functional programming. And it's like, your macro might look like, actually I'm not sure what it would look like. That would depend upon what you had for, I got to find out whether you can swap in variables. Like if you were able to punch in a variable in the middle of a macro and it would get replaced everywhere it appeared, you would be like, and it would do something like that. I don't know what the format is for doing that kind of thing, but it would do something like that. And then anywhere you wanted to use that, you'd be doing that thing and putting in this bit. But before I log off for the day, let's go and check and see whether our star childs are working, because that was one of the things I was trying to approximate. We've established that I have MV built. I can put out MV now. You can put it on the stack of things to put out. But what about StarChild? Well, there's StarChild, but I don't see So let's just look at what we've got here. Maybe we just design, let's fix this. Something's wrong. I don't know exactly what's wrong, but as usual for today, something's wrong. So we're going to see, first of all, that would have been in the components, unless it wasn't. Do we have a star child 2 there? No. Do we have both of the star childs here and they're not showing up? Because if so, I know why. Star child and star child 2, yes we do. Therefore, since that's still there, but it's not showing up, here's the thing I'm going to look into. Did I update the version number? Actually, letters would be a better way of describing that. And once I've debugged this and shown that StarChild functions and works and lives, then we'll be done for the day. So here's the original. Its version says star. Here's the new one. Its version says stas. I wonder whether well, let's see whether this works the second time around. StarChild 2. Drop into components. There was something there. Let's open this up and let's see if we can find something that's marked StarChild 2, because that should have been there. Units, Airwindows. Was I looking at recent effects? That'd be weird. PQRS. Okay. Now this is looking better. This is what I wanted to see. StarChild does this. Green coarse or fine? Pops a little bit. And it's a bit loud. But duration is how tightly these are aligned to the original sound. It's got a little decay off there. And then we've got this sort of echoey, sparkly thing going on. And then coarse fine is going to give us a more finely packed, larger number of taps. So there you have that. And then maximum fineness. So a whole funny sound going on. It starts sounding almost like one of those delay things where you're getting a robotic note out of it because it's a series of taps in evenly spaced, but it's not really evenly spaced. But we've got this as a sort of echo. And it makes a sort of weird echoey thing where it's almost like those gated reverbs, but not. But the trouble is when we run 192 hertz, since the original StarChild is not, in fact, I could do original effects. Different. It's still acting a little bit like a gated reverb, but that is so dense that it sounds like a single echo. It's no good. We can do chorus. But that's still way too quick. It's not sustaining nearly as long. But if we go to Airwindows, Star Child 2, there we go. And it kind of sounds even cooler in a way, because it's doing the undersampling. So it's kind of reconstructing the sound. And the raw algorithm sounds kind of janky. But then when we reconstruct it again, it starts sounding kind of neat. Do I have voice anywhere? I bet I could make one. Let's find out. I think it wants me to be in stereo, so we'll do stereo. And then, see, here's how Twisted Wave works. I need to specify how it's going to do its thing. Input device can be the input, and we're not going to play through because that would be bad. Get lots of feedback. And then we'll do a quick little thing where we're recording, and this ought to give us a weird robot voice. Let's do the robot voice, and that's how that's going to work. Alrighty, and now to turn this over to Star Child. Instant audio. Now, Star Child 2. And it will repeat for me too. Robot voice. Let's do the robot voice. And that's how that's going to work. Alright. And now to turn this over to Star Child. Thing where we're recording. And this audio has a weird robot voice. Let's do the robot voice. And that's how that's going to work. Alright. And now to turn this over to Star Child. Thing where we're recording. And this ought to give us a weird robot voice. Let's do the robot voice, and that's how that's going to work. Alright, and now to turn this over to Star Child. See, what I'm doing there is sustained duration is the total length of it, and that's what makes it sound like the gated reverb. I'm all wet because that's one of the reasons that it's going to... I can probably bring a little dry in. And then grain, coarse, and fine is how densely packed the little internal echoes are. So I'm going to try to do a robot voice with the track that I just did there by setting the grain fine enough that it's a frequency rather than just like a slap echo. Because I mean, if I do full coarse, that's going to be a slap echo. We're recording, and you saw to give us a weird robot voice. But fast enough, it starts just sounding like gibberish. But and up here, and one of the things that's happening with sustained duration is if I have it be much shorter, it's actually not keeping that many of the echoes. This is a very only cranked way up does it seem to be giving me a very long sustain. We're recording, and that's a weird robot voice. Let's do the robot voice, and that's how that's gonna work. Okay, and I think we got there. I was trying to set the delays rapid enough that they were hitting a note that doesn't fit with the note of the underlying sound. Here's your robot voice. Let's tune it. Note went down. Yeah, voiceover, Randy. Well, as it happens, I'm being very unproductive, but that's fine. I'm very, very chatty today, though, because it's not going to be a full-length day. And what we've done is made a robot voice using Starchild 2. Ooh, nice.
Turn this over to Starchild. Turn this over to Starchild. Turn this over to Starchild. Turn this over. Alright. And now to turn this over to Starchild. Alright. And now to turn this over to Starchild. Alright. And now to turn this over to Starchild.
Total robot voice.
Thing where we're recording. And this ought to give us a weird robot voice. Let's do the robot voice, and that's how that's gonna work. Alright. And now to turn this over to Starchild. Ought to give us a weird, ought to give us a weird, ought to give us a weird, and this ought to give us a weird, and this ought to give us a weird, and this ought to give us a, this ought to give us a weird, 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 this ought to give us a
Gabber beat.
this ought to give us a weird, this ought to give us a weird, this ought to give us a weird.
Feel free to sample this bit.
Weird, this ought to give us a weird, this robot voice, robot voice, robot voice, robot voice. Robot voice, 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 robot voice.
Sort of a sound effect now.
Robot voice, robot voice, robot voice, robot voice. Robot voice, robot voice, robot voice, robot voice, robot voice.
And we apply it. Your end result looks like that.
Robot voice, robot voice.
And there you have it. So I think that is suggesting that we have succeeded with Starchild 2. And all I got to do is adapt all of those things over to the VST format, and then build the Mac VST for retro computers, and then build the Windows VST for both MV2 and Starchild 2 for retro computers, and then build the Linux VST for Intel processors for the VST for retro computers, and then build the Linux VST for MV2 and Starchild 2 for the Raspberry Pi, but only for 32-bit as I understand it. and then bring all of those things over to the modern computer and do the signed version of the audio unit of Star Child 2 and MV2 for modern Mac computers, and then do the signed version of the VST version of MV2 and Star Child 2 for modern computers. At which point, once I'm finished releasing the plates and things, then you can have them. Because that is what life is. But you know, it's great when I see people using this stuff and enjoying it and getting something out of it. It makes up for the nonsense that sometimes the streaming or the gear puts me through. Speaking of which, back over to this world. I have established that I've successfully undersampled these things. And what we're going to do is see whether the filter is any better. Removing the color tint. Nope. Nope. It's not any better. So from the land of purple and broken video feeds, I will say good day to you for now, and I will get to work doing some of those porting to VST and all that kind of stuff. Once I've done that, these things will also show up in VCB Rack. Wish me luck. I promise this camera is fine. It is OBS that is suddenly doing this, and wasn't doing it before. I don't know why. But on that ground, I will talk to you folks later. Bye-bye.